Holy cow, Spurs fans. We are moving quickly and we are getting some big deals done. We have just announced, or at least Fabrizio Romano has announced, given the here we go, in fact, on Morgan Gibbs-White coming to Tottenham Hotspur. Spurs have triggered the release clause of £60 million. Here it is, everybody, for your eyes to see. Trying to put it up here for you guys. Fabrizio Romano saying, breaking news, Morgan Gibbs-White to Tottenham. Here we go. Spurs trigger £60 million release clause after direct contact with Forest today. Medical booked and set to take place in 24 hours, as Telefootball and Mike McGrath have reported. Follows Kudus deal, massive moves for the Spurs project. Spurs project is definitely underway. He also said Morgan Gibbs-White has now been authorized for the medical on Friday as the new Tottenham player. £60 million release clause triggered by Spurs, and the deal has been confirmed. One more after Kudus. Now, straight away, Dave, what's your gut reaction to this signing? I think everybody's just over the moon that we already had the Kudus deal done. Now we're getting the Morgan Gibbs-White deal done. Daniel Levy, he's pulling out the purse strings. He's showing some ambition here.
Look, well, Jack, it's something that Spurs fans have long demanded, to show a bit of ambition. I thought yesterday was going to be as good as it gets this transfer window. And we've doubled down again less than 24 hours later and doubled down with another, what they call bomba nowadays in the transfer market. Look, Morgan Gibbs-White is a player that me and you have long admired. We spoke about behind the scenes many a times. We've often said, you know what, we wouldn't mind seeing him in a Spurs jersey. We always looked at him and said he's sort of a bit of a Spurs player. So I'm really excited to get the deal over the line. And again, that even in context, the two signings, Kudus and Morgan Gibbs-White, are not players that people have to go and Google, and find a bit about. They're players that people know exactly what they're getting and what to expect when they turn up here at Tottenham. This is something we haven't done in a long, long time, where we've gone after teams in the Premier League, teams that we should be picking off their best players from and delivering them at Tottenham Hotspur, weakening them and strengthening us. That's exactly what we're doing with these two deals.
I mean, he qualifies as a marquee signing for you, right? He definitely is in that category of, big time player. Somebody, though, I think maybe over the past couple of seasons has started to really catch people's eye. I think that move for Forest, from Wolves for him has really worked out. I think even that last season, he's probably one of the better midfielders to watch in the Premier League. And I think even during James Maddison's first season with Tottenham Hotspur, I actually remember saying, because I wasn't a big fan of Maddison in his first season, whereas last season I really, was a big fan of his. But I did even say, I feel like Morgan Gibbs-White's even having, a better time in the Premier League than James Maddison is, at Tottenham Hotspur. That's how good I think Gibbs-White has been in the last couple of seasons. But I mean, after finishing 17th last season, Dave, are moves like this maybe showing that Spurs are maybe more serious than usual? Or they kind of, is it panicking, maybe after what happened last season? How can you explain, this sort of sudden form of ambition, and also the fact that they're triggering a release clause? When's the last time Spurs have ever even triggered a release clause? It's their least favorite thing to do.
No, just before we get on to that, though, just
Sure.
quickly, Jack, if you cast your mind back to when we had Jose Mourinho in charge, I remember going down to Wolves. I think we ended up losing 4-2 that night, if I'm correct. But I remember an 18-year-old Morgan Gibbs-White single-handedly destroyed us that night, and we're all sitting there going, who's this guy? And since then, he's a player that I've sort of kept my eye on. And when he's gone to Nottingham Forest, he's been a massive key figure in the heart of that midfield, dragging them from relegation fodder all the way to qualifying for Europe for the first time in 30 years, was providing goals and assists from the heart of that midfield. And what I really like about Gibbs-White is not only is a player with a bit of flair that can score goals outside the box, beat a player, deliver a perfect cross or a good ball in behind for people, but he also gets stuck in. He has a bit of tenacity about him. And for me, he's sort of that complete midfielder, and I really like this guy. But when it comes to, did 17th maybe scare Tottenham into this? I think it has a large part to do with it, Jack. Look, I don't think we were ever in fear of getting relegated. At the end of the day, if we were ever close to it, we would have sacked off Europe. At the end of the day, we are European champions. I think there is a part of them that recognises they really do need to up the level of quality within this squad to just go and try and compete in the Champions League and even just try and get out of the group phase. But also a recognition that in the Premier League, it's unforgiving. It's not like other leagues. If you keep going after young signings, it will come back to bite you. And I do think there is an element that maybe it's knee-jerked them into going for a Kudus, a Gibbs-White, and really bringing in players of quality. But also, look, fair play to Daniel Levy on this one, Jack. This is a guy that came out, and I ridiculed him, when he came out and said, I want to win the Premier League and I want to win the Champions League. Because for me, look, words is one thing, but actions is another. Go and prove it with actions. We've heard this before from Daniel Levy, but go and back it up. And to be fair to the guy, He's gone and backed it up. 2 signings in 2 days. And the fact that we've gone and triggered a release clause, Jack, is not something that Tottenham traditionally do. Usually we'll see that release clause. We'll go in about 20 million under and try and get a deal. Whereas this one, we've just gone in. How much is the release clause? No problem by doing that, because when we piss about with deals, it actually gives other teams a chance to hijack deals that we're trying to make. Whereas the fact that we've just gone in, release clause, medical tomorrow, no chance for anyone to hijack this one. It looks like he is set to be a Tottenham player, and it shows a bit of ambition by the football club. Maybe Daniel Levy does want to win the Premier League and try and go for the Champions League with signings like this.
It already was a Hotspur summer after we had won the Europa League, but it feels like a Daniel Levy summer, one of, absolute balls, you have to say, because the guy sacked Ange Postecoglou after he won the biggest trophy that Spurs have had in a long time, then brings in the likes of Thomas Frank, somebody that was always just sort of rumored, with the Spurs fans, compared often with Spurs fans. What brought that guy through from Brentford, which wasn't easy. He had to pay out some money in order to sack Ange Postecoglou, and in order to bring in Thomas Frank. He's brought in a lot of the coaching staff for Thomas Frank as well, to be properly supported. And now he's just brought in 2 massive signings before even the first game of preseason, with Mohamed Kudus and Morgan Gibbs-White. And also getting these deals done in the same week is also kind of impressive. Don't really remember a time when Spurs have really done it like that, where they've announced, 2 major signings. I mean, let alone in the same week, but pretty much in the same 24 to 48 hours. That's also kind of the crazy bit about it. And what's also funny is we're getting really no, initial sort of inklings of this happening. These are just happening out of nowhere. Like, it's just coming like all of a sudden, maybe kind of like the old days where you would, open the paper one day and you just saw, oh, Spurs have signed someone. It feels kind of like that, where, the likes of David Ornstein, even just this morning, like, hinted at it. He was like, Spurs are interested, Spurs are looking at, Morgan Gibbs-White. All of a sudden, a few hours later, Fabrizio Romano is saying, here we go again, after only just 24 hours ago, the Kudus deal, being announced. Maybe the Kudus one, we had a bit more of an idea, or may have a bit more of a guess that was eventually going to get done. But these have all of a sudden, happened very, very quickly. Kudus is already doing his medical at Tottenham Hotspur right now, at Hotspur Way. There were videos of him, walking into the training ground. So it's incredible to see Spurs moving in this type of manner. But let's get on to go ahead.
I was going to say, Jack, you were bringing up Thomas Frank and the fact that they brought in the coaching staff, and
a lot of big moves.
One of my big questions around the Thomas Frank era was, okay, it's one thing bringing in a manager and bringing in the coaching staff, because I've always believed that Thomas Frank was going to bring the defensive structure that we lacked last season. But one thing him and his coaches were never really going to be able to fix was the lack of quality or potency in that front line. That was just there, evident to see, and that was what really needed massive investment. And they've gone and done that with Gibbs-White, providing goals and assists from midfield. Kudus, providing goals and assists out wide. They've gone and done that. They've improved that forward line massively for Thomas Frank. And, my big question was, are they going to back the guy? Well, so far, they're backing the guy. And I'll be honest, last season, me and you highlighted that front line. When everyone else was going after the back line, me and you highlighted that front line consistently. Going forward, we need massive improvements. We need quality. And it looks like the club have agreed with our assessment on that. And they've gone out, they've signed Morgan Gibbs-White, who's a good midfielder, but affects the game going forward, and Kudus. So for me, it actually gets me really excited heading into this season. Another thing that we've all called for at Tottenham Hotspur, everyone's now worried about who we're going to sell. I couldn't give a toss, Jacko. I really couldn't care. At the end of the day, I've been screaming for some squad depth, and I've always said, bring in your players, then you assess your squad, and then you let go of the ones that are no longer needed. And it looks like we're starting to do that. I've heard all the excuses on why Tottenham couldn't do it, would never do it, everything else. But it finally looks like we're starting to act like and behave like a proper Big Six club, where you get your targets and then you say to others, right, out you go.
The other kind of crazy thing too is, maybe the likes of Van de Ven, Pedro Porro, Christian Romero, of course, are also maybe, starting to turn their head. They're actually seeing some real business being done, some big marquee signings coming through the door that could convince them that this is, the right place to be, that this is the right project to get behind. Let's get on to maybe, Dave, who is Morgan Gibbs-White as a player, as a midfielder? Where does he fit into this team? Just in general, in terms of what type of player he is, what do you think he brings, that maybe we don't have, or what type of midfielder is he? I think he fits in the creative midfielder role, but he works exceptionally hard. He's a guy that just, is all about the pitch, almost a bit all action, kind of has a bit of a box to box type of style about him, but he is, the guy that pulls the strings as well, in that Forest midfield. So what type of midfielder is he? Is he sort of everything? Does he have anything that he even needs to work on or improve? Like, what sort of midfielder is he for you?
Well, look, he's not that number 6 that everybody's been crying out for and
True.
craving for. He is more of an offensive-minded midfielder. But one of the big things we were speaking about Maddison heading into last season was he's got to be able to do the dogged side of the game. You have to be able to do that. Many people gave him the excuse saying he couldn't do it. He ended up showing that he could do it. Morgan Gibbs-White already has that. It's not like we're asking him to be able to, that he needs to improve being able to get stuck in and stuff like that. What I really like about Morgan Gibbs-White, actually, Jack, is he's a complete midfielder. And what I mean by that, with Papa Matasar, he's got elements where he needs to improve. With James Maddison, there's been question marks over certain sides of his game. With Kulu, the same. With Bentancur, to a degree, the same. I look at Morgan Gibbs-White, and I actually think he's the complete midfielder. He can get stuck in. He's got that bit of mongrel, a bit like Dele Alli, to a degree.
Yeah.
Has that heart of a lion, that bit of shithouse in them, likes the tough side of the game. The guy can also play. With Forest, he got on the ball a lot. And, everyone speaks about Alanga, Hudson-Odoi, Chris Wood. Who's the guy that released most of them? It was good Morgan Gibbs-White, ball at his feet, punting it down the line for others, putting it in the box for other people. Not only that, if that isn't on, he can get on the ball, take players on, and score goals from outside the box. For me, I think we're getting a really complete midfielder here. I really, really like Morgan Gibbs-White.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his last season, 7 goals and 8 assists in the Premier League. Season before that with Forest, he had 5 goals and 10 assists. Season before that, 5 goals and 8 assists, for Forest. So this has been a team as well that's kind of been towards the bottom of the table, except for last season. They had some pretty horrendous seasons under Steve Cooper and as well, Nuno, like when he picked up from Steve Cooper, wasn't really doing too hot. Nuno, he actually just sort of got them out of relegation, sort of conversations. But then this last season, of course, they were one of the more impressive teams to watch. I wouldn't necessarily say they were a fun team to watch. They were very defensive minded, very organized, but were more kind of on the counterattacking side of things, which is also maybe a good thing for Gibbs-White. We know that he can be unselfish. We know that he can get stuck in. He can be a part of a midfield shape that, absorbs pressure, but then looks to hit teams on the break. He's not maybe someone like you mentioned before with Maddison, who was a bit of the opposite, a guy that was allowed to be kind of maybe a guy that didn't have to work as hard as others in the midfield. Gibbs-White, has in a way learned, the hard way and the good way of, having to muck in defensively for his team. But then at the same time, they're looking to get the ball to him to make things happen, to get people, out of their seats, in that Forest stadium. So I'm really, really excited by the signing. And I agree with you. I think there are not really a whole lot of weaknesses that I can think about, in his game. I think he's got a great shot on him. I think he's got a bit of that X factor where he'll pull off, an impressive pass, or he might see, a ball in behind that maybe other players just don't see. He has the skill to be able to pull it off. He can clip it over the top. You can see a bit of flair in his game every now and again. And he knows how to be able to pop up in big moments. When I think of Forest in the last few seasons, I think of Morgan Gibbs-White. I think of him as pretty much their best player. I understand Chris Wood, I've always had a soft spot for, but I think he's probably been their best player, the last few seasons. That's what also makes it pretty impressive. And he's going to be coming into a team that you would imagine won't be as attacking as maybe Ange Postecoglou's, but should be a bit more on the front foot than what you saw at Nuno's team. And I think this is a really good move for Morgan Gibbs-White in general.
I think listening to you speak there, Jack, and I think where I think he's going to make the difference in Tottenham's midfield is, I think last year and in general under Ange Postecoglou, we've almost missed that Christian Eriksen type who can get on the ball and spray them passes around. That sort of passer of a ball. And I think Morgan Gibbs-White has that. I would argue probably a better passer of the ball than Maddison. Kulu's a player that likes to get on the ball and drive. Bentancur is a guy that, he can pass the ball, but it's more 5-10-yard passes through the line. Morgan Gibbs-White can get on the ball and switch play, open up the pitch with his passing. And I think that's the massive difference that he will bring to this Tottenham midfield, and something that we lack. Just like Kudus brings that ability to take on players.
And then also maybe last and certainly not least, who's he displacing? Who's he competing with in that midfield? Is he going to be playing as a number 8 alongside James Maddison? Is he going to be pushing Kulu out of the team? Is he, part of a 3-man midfield, 2-man midfield? How do you see him fitting into this team? Some people are saying, I love the signing, but where's he going to play? A lot of people have been saying.
No, look, I understand this, Jack, but you look at Man City squad, Chelsea squad, Liverpool squad. They sign players, and their fans aren't going worrying about where is he going to play. It's like, look at the size of our squad, look at the depth and quality we have, and that's what we need to start getting to. That's what we need to achieve. It's good to have all these options. What we can't do is get into a position where James Maddison is out injured, it affects us completely. Kulu's out injured, it affects us completely. Bentancur suspended, we have no one in there, and it affects us massively. And then you're relying on someone like Airhead Basuma to come in, who just lets you down time and time again, and relying on some of the youngsters to come in and really play well. It's good to have these options. Maddison comes out, Gibbs-White comes in. Kulusevski comes out, Gibbs-White comes in. It's good to have these options. We've got to remember, if we want to embark on a quest where we challenge for all four trophies, which top clubs are supposed to do, that's a 50, 60 game a season, let alone the international games and tournaments that go on in between seasons as well, that add to the players' appearances. You're talking 70, 75 games a season now for these players. It is nearly impossible to get your guys out there and just get out there and, play every single game. That's one of Tottenham's biggest downfall since Pochettino, and I'd argue even with Pochettino to a degree. Once we got an injury, we never had a guy that could come in and pick up that slack and take the mantle and keep us going. That was always the difference between Tottenham and the top clubs. They just had the next guy off the rank, in you go. This is where we're getting to, and I'm glad we're getting to that. The options going into midfield next season: Bentancur, Maddison, Kulusevski, Gibbs-White, Papa Matasar, Bergvall, Archie Gray, 7 midfielders there, 7 really good options. One comes out, one comes in, and I'm not looking at any of them options, dreading them coming in like I used to do with Skip, Winks, players like that. I'm like, oh, fuck me, we're losing today's game. I don't get that feeling now, because I look at any of them options and I go, they're ready to go and they can make a difference, and that's where we need to get to.
I think you're really spot on about when we lost James Maddison. It really felt like Spurs took a huge hit, to the midfield, especially in the creative side of things. It just felt like there was no one really else in the team that could do what Maddison was doing for us. And Morgan Gibbs-White, we've almost hinted at as almost maybe even a better player than James Maddison is. That's just, how good this signing could be for us, and that we have just 2, in my opinion, incredible creative midfielders to pick from, and potentially playing the same team, but also be pushing each other. And in case one, goes out, we know that one of them can step up and it isn't such a detrimental loss, because that has been a trend with Spurs in the past, where we just lose that one guy, and then all of a sudden it sends shockwaves, to the rest of the team, where, you just see kind of the system start to falter. You see sort of different areas of the pitch all of a sudden not click in the same way that they used to. That was the case when you lose, a Harry Kane, you lose a Sonny to an injury. And now, feels like it happened with us with James Maddison in the past as well. And having someone now like Morgan Gibbs-White is an excellent sort of, option to have. I think that's a key point. That's how he fits in, is that when we lose one of these players, which is inevitable at some point, you have someone else that can step up, and it won't be as felt.
We're not
any final words?
We're not used to this level of squad depth that Tottenham, so we're worrying, where's he going to play? We're going to say, look, we need this level of depth, trust me. But lastly, Jack, what I will say is, I think with Kudus and Gibbs-White coming in so close together, it seems like Tottenham are actually going to wait to do a double announcement of the player and of the players. And I think by doing that, I think it actually sends out a statement of intent. Kudus and Gibbs-White announced together. It sends out a statement of intent that, we want to push higher up the league. We want to go after domestic cup, and we want to compete in the Champions League. However, I still urge Tottenham cannot stop there. Bring in a number 6 and a left back of similar ilk, and we will be cooking next year. But I can tell you now, off the back of these 2 signings, I think it will massively improve us going forward. And I think Spurs fans can finally get back to watching the joy of an attacking flair Tottenham team who knows how to play the Tottenham way. Pass and move style football. Brilliant. Let's fucking go.
It's unfamiliar territory for us Spurs fans to see us cooking like this and spending money like this. Who stole Levy's wallet? And whoever did, please don't give it back. We'll see you next time, everybody. We'll see you later as well for a live show. We'll be doing a panel show, just reacting to this signing, asking some others, some of the same questions that we brought up here, going into a little bit more depth with it, and also interacting with all of you lovely folks over the brand new signing. But we'll see you next time, everybody. Welcome to Tottenham Hotspur, Morgan Gibbs-White. It's crazy to be saying this.
Get your thoughts in the comment section below and smash a like. Come on.